So hi Suzi, hi again.
No, it is good to see you.
It's great to see you. I'm looking forward for this hour in the week that I drop everything and I don't think about who I forgot to pick up or if the food is burning, and everything is aside and we just, just
I
talking.
love it.
Yeah, talking to each other. To anyone who just joining us, this is part 3 of 5 parts that were, in dialogue about topics that I find really interesting, and you put your wisdom into it. This part is about 4 elements that is in every life story, and we'll explain later why it's 4 and 5. But first I want to say that part 1 was about decision making. Part 2 was about acknowledging what is. Just want to maybe say something simple about it. Acknowledging what is about facing what is right now happening to me in a deep level. Would you agree?
I would agree. And just to put it in sort of really common language, when people talk about like owning what they feel or owning what they even know, that idea of ownership in maybe I'm not using it in such a popular kind of way. I'm talking about kind of like a deep ownership, so that we can feel the relief of being in our wholeness as we recognize something and we prepare in a certain way to stand with our recognition.
Nice. It brings me the word safety, because I'm about to talk about fears today, and I want to talk about safety as this place that you just talked about. I think it's a safe place to be. So just to introduce us, I'm Iris Shaham, Family Constellation Facilitator, an artist, a curious person, and Suzi, you became one of my main teacher in Family Constellation. So you are one of the, older ones, one of the, first ones that spent time with Bert Hellinger, the founder, and you had a published company, or how do I say it in good words?
I did. I had a publishing company.
Okay.
I co-owned a publishing company with an Ericksonian therapist who introduced me to Bert Hellinger.
Okay, wonderful. And I know you're a writer, and I enjoy your Substacks that is, coming once a week or more even. And the topic I'm about to open is the 5 elements that are in every life story. And before I was starting to talk with you about it, I was wondering, is it Bert's? Is it yours? I mean, and please, you introduce.
I will. First, I'm just going to observe that, you said 5 elements. And when I introduced, but I love this, right? So I was saying it is that I love this because to me now there are 5 elements, because there's something that I perhaps gave not enough weight to in terms of how I thought about the 5th element. And the 5th element that you describe is a little bit maybe closer to everyday life for people. So I will say that the conceptualization or the articulation is mine. What I would say is it is in a kind of collaboration, a kind of how would we call it? Like an other dimensional collaboration with Bert Hellinger. In other words, I will say that it's observations of every constellation he ever did, every constellation I have ever done, and every constellation I have ever seen. He just doesn't know he's in collaboration with me. Um, but, so be it, right? I probably have even said in the previous session, James Baldwin doesn't know he's in collaboration with me, and, my mother doesn't know that she's in collaboration with me, so these kind of places where we are gathering, we study and we're gathering wisdom, and I have an articulation of this. Is it mine? Not exactly. Is it somebody else's? No. It is ours.
Hmm. It's beautiful, and I'm really curious about it because it's wow. What are these elements that every life story carries?
So I introduced them, and I introduced them in a class that you were in, and I've introduced them a couple of times in other classes because for me, this is the place uh, where our understanding meets the behaviors that we don't understand. So there is a kind of axis in a way where the historical reverberations come to us and we act upon them, but we don't know what we're acting upon, right? So Bert Hellinger described this as personal conscience and systemic conscience, and I'm talking about the edge of them, right? So what you're calling the 4 or 5 elements, or what we could call sort of the 4 fundamental fears, might be another way to put it, are I'm going to start with the most obvious one that everybody talks about, which is fear of death. Fear of death. And Bert Hellinger and many people talk about this idea of this being kind of foundational, like this fear of death is foundational. Almost the moment we are born, we become aware of the possibility that when when somebody leaves, they will never come back, right? So it's like very deep in us, this fear of death. Hellinger described that in his mind, every religion is built around the fear of death and denying it for the most part.
So,
We will go to heaven. We will come back. We will.
I'm laughing because my grandmother jumps out. She had a saying. She said, every time somebody died, she said, well, they didn't come back, so it must be a good place there.
I love that. I love that. That's a wonderful way to think about it. But it's all images, right? It's all images. And in constellations, one of the most profound images is that people leave and are still there somehow. Whether I work with people who take that very literally, and I work with people who take it less literally. And for me, it's all beautiful. And it is a way of navigating this fear of death. So that's the kind of, for me, the most obvious one in a certain way.
So I guess it's the one element that when you say it, I really can't find it in my body. It feels so out there. So I'm curious to try and touch it and why it's important to recognize it even.
I think it's important to recognize it because it has something to do with the depth of our ease, right? One of the things that is useful to be easy with is that our time is limited. And some of us have no sense of urgency about anything. And then we are surprised when suddenly there's urgency and we don't do what we meant to do, or we don't say what we meant to say, or, right? And then others are so obsessed with the urgency that we are constantly terrified that we will not have the time we need to. And in that fear that we will not have the time we need to, we lose the time we have. We lose the time we have. So the recognition of this particular fear is really around how can I treat each moment, not each day even, but each moment like it has meaning. Like it has meaning. The fear of the loss of the moment is not helpful. But the assumption that I will have moments forever is also not helpful.
It's interesting. I have to share that I, most of my life I was who I might want to become, and I can be anything. I can be this or that or anything that I want. But when I reached my 50s, I something shifted and I thought, okay, there's limit options now. And it felt like a shift that instead of thinking everything is forever without a beginning and an end, now there's an end. So there was a beginning and I'm locating myself in between. Yeah.
It's kind of, I mean, that's kind of uh, a at least a wonderful articulation of it, because there's a recognition without a kind of terror, right? Which puts you in a good place to say, well, chances are pretty good that, no, people are going to yell at me, but chances are pretty good, Iris, that you will not be a ballerina. Chances are pretty good that if that was in your mind somewhere, that's probably not going to happen. All right. Okay. So that's kind of going back to last week. That's sort of an important acknowledging what is, because it does allow us to begin to imagine, okay, well, that dream that I had, that I was going to be a ballerina, or that my mother was going to live forever, or that I was going to live forever, or whatever that was, whatever that kind of dream state was, I can begin to really think about, okay, what was the essential part of that? And hold to perhaps the essential part of that, and let that actually be a part of what I do for the next however many years, right?
I think I need more to understand this. Um, so first of all, when you said you're not going to be a ballerina anymore, I must admit I got sad. But let's go back to that. What do you mean by essential?
So what is the essence of the thing? So by the way, I was projecting onto you, I think, because in my mind, I always quote Martha Graham, right? Because in my mind, like taking these dance classes when I was in my teens and even early 20s, there was something about, it's not that I thought I was going to be a modern dancer, but maybe a part of me did think maybe I could, right? Um, when I think about it now, and I do think about it now, but rather than think about it with regret, and pretty clearly I'm not going to be a modern dancer now, I do kind of visit what was the essence of that dream. And part of the essence of that particular dream was actually, I love movement. And constellation is fundamentally about movement, physical, mental, intellectual, psychological, spiritual, right? It's about movement. And part of the reason I think I actually love constellation is for that reason. And it's very much like modern dance. Modern dance, right? Unlike ballet, modern is low to the ground. It is barefoot. It is actually really kind of raw in a certain way. It's not precious. So, what is so for me, the essence there is kind of literal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So even if you didn't become a dancer, and I'm not talking about you specifically, you
Yep.
can always look for the essence and apply it in a different way where you are right now.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Rather than kind of, people tend to throw out the whole thing. And then the thing that happens next maybe doesn't have that level of satisfaction because we threw out the whole thing. Time got short, we threw out the whole thing. And I think that's true whether we're talking about things like creativity, but also about life, just about life itself. It is true that it's funny, you were talking about turning 50. I had a woman in my class who was talking about the idea that I think she is turning 79. And her thought was, right? Her thought was like the 70s, easy. It's the 80s that I can't face. Right?
Interesting.
So I'm thinking, oh, I hope when she's 89, she goes, the 80s were easy. It's the 90s can't face.
Wow.
But it is that fear of yes, I suppose it's the fear of the unknown, but I think for me, more what I see, it's the fear of actually, wait, don't I have another chance to reconcile with this person or reconcile with this part of myself or uh, to to bloom again? Can't I try that? I think it is the end of chances that feels very difficult to face, and people do anything not to face it. And there's something beautiful and important in just holding this sense that there is some urgency and there is time. Both.
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 Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. We can talk a whole talk only about this, but let's get to the second element.
So the second one, I'm going to stay with the second most common, I think, the thing that just rolls off of people's tongues, which is fear of abandonment. Fear of abandonment. And again, when we think about, I will do anything not to be abandoned, that has a whole slew of difficult behaviors, like I will reject before being rejected. Very popular. I will leave before you leave me. So popular, very effective. It works very well, except that it's very lonely. And we sometimes give up important people in doing that, in that assumption that it will happen. So fear of abandonment is based on an assumption of abandonment. Fear of abandonment is based on an assumption of abandonment. Had we not been abandoned somehow, somewhere, we actually would not have the assumption of it.
Yeah.
Right?
So you're saying we all know it. We all know it because we all been through it in some levels.
That's right. That's right. So fear is a sort of odd word to use here because it's almost really, it's a fear based on the assumption of it, something I already know, right? And again, with that being sort of a strong aspect of why we make our choices, um, it ensures a kind of limitation, right? It ensures a sort of, uh, protectiveness is limiting in a way, right? So if I'm going to protect my heart from what I already have experienced, then the loss in the past gets projected onto loss in the future, right?
So what is important here for actually all of us, but some of us has bigger degree of this abandonment experience in the past. Um, what is important? How can we use it as, as a basket to the future? Like,
I like that. Um, I like that as a basket to the future. Like, what can we gather in a way, right? So I think that the first thing is to divide, and this is, again, a kind of aspect of constellation aspect of um, thinking systemically, is to let yourself travel from one field to the next rather than working from the back fields into the future. There is this middle ground that we really want to populate, animate, inhabit, and cultivate, right? Because this middle ground is a kind of buffer, a kind of segue, maybe that's a better word, a bridge from the past to the future. So we want to really pause here and really consider, okay, and I know I will let you speak to your own experience. But when I really realized like, oh, my dad left when I was a baby. And by the way, the grammar there is important. I used to say, my dad left me when I was a baby, but actually, it's a little bit different from that. He left when I was a baby. Okay, so two things about that. One is that internal experience, that assumption that I will be left, that knowing that I will be left created some deeply protective ways of being in the world where I know that I treated people in ways, particularly men, in ways that were difficult because they didn't know what I was protecting myself from, and I didn't know. But it informed me the more important the person, the more powerful the protective behavior, right? So the sooner I would leave, perhaps, or the more concrete I would be about saying no, right? Okay. So what begins to happen is building this middle ground and really understanding that my father left when I was a baby, in part because he could not stay for many systemic reasons, which I won't go into here. But that understanding of him is not about forgiveness. It's about actually being able to travel out of that ground that he was in into my ground and begin to see the future from here,
Mm.
right? It softens or makes more nuanced the experience so that when I look out, you are not my father. This is not that time. And I am not a helpless infant.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel it too. You know, my father, when I was born, he went to war. I mean, he was out of the house for maybe 6 months. Maybe he traveled to come and see me, but then he went right back. And it's very hard to recognize it when you grow up because it belonged to such a prehistorical period that I myself cannot even track it in my mind.
No,
Yeah,
but it is in your body. It
right.
lives in your body, and it's it's part of your compass. It's part of the reason you've made certain choices that you now may go like, "Wait, what?" And just a really quick thing for particularly for facilitators, the idea that he left for 6 months and he came back. When he leaves for 6 months, there is no way for that very young brain to grok the really nuanced idea that, "Oh, he'll be back." That belongs to an older brain, right? The younger brain has no idea that he's coming back.
Yeah, yeah. And that's one of the beautiful things that we can actually, um, I don't know, be a part in Constellation to bring these really young parts and see what they're actually saying and actually look at them and then integrate them again differently. Um, I don't know if it will be in the recording or not, but I have to say a word about all my fellow brothers and sisters from the kibbutz that were raised uh, in the kids society, eat, slept, and did everything, while the parents were there, but not as the main caregivers,
Yeah,
which is an interesting experience. Yeah.
it
Um,
is, and I think that I mean, I think about you all the time because I think about that kibbutz experience and how it is, I mean, the nuclear family is a fairly new idea. This thing that we hold so tightly to is it's a fairly new idea. And nevertheless, right, we have can it be that the biological parents are extremely important because they are my content, and that doesn't make the other caregivers any less important? Could we hold, and many people can't, but could we hold that idea? Could we hold that idea and then have many forms of families?
yeah, yeah, it's true. And it's not, I didn't think about it. A few decades ago, we were a part of a group, not
That's
just a
right.
family.
That's right.
And it's interesting to think about it. Um, yeah. So what is a person who grew up in a kibbutz, knowing this coming of assumption of abandonment, how can he gather it for the future? Is it?
So
Yeah.
so go ahead. Go ahead. Did you have more to the question?
No.
I thought you were gonna help me. Okay. Um, I think that a again, I mean, for me, it is so much about we understand the past, not in order to forgive. Again, this is big in my work, this forgiveness not being the thing, right? Forgiveness comes when we travel, right? And even the idea of I'm grateful for my life comes when I'm grateful for my life, right? So the traveling part is extremely important to me. We must get out of those earlier fields. And part of that is really recognizing, for instance, that those who made decisions that impacted you, for instance, your father going to war is a very powerful decision. Now, you can tell me that he didn't make, he was forced, but doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And it certainly doesn't matter from your perspective. From your perspective, he left. I don't care if God told him to go or the general told him to go. From your perspective, from that young one's perspective, he was there and then he wasn't, right? So part of your kind of seeing the broader context of things is so that you can get some freedom of movement and know two things, right? Know two things. One, had he not been there at all, I would not be here. Foundation, it's just foundational stuff, but the truth of it, we just kind of put aside and say, but, and then we don't celebrate the truth of that, right? That's one part. The other part is that we get very embroiled in the idea that if I reject him, he won't leave again. Or, so that might sound familiar to some of us. It's familiar to me. If I dismiss my father as unimportant, then he won't leave me again. He won't. Right. So that's something we.
That takes me to the third one, actually.
Okay, so just hang one sec.
Okay.
Okay, because this will take you to the third one too, actually, which is that because they're all connected, of course, right? Which is that the second part, right? One is a kind of defense behavior. The second part of it is when I see him in context, when I see your father in context, or I see my father in context, I get to feel like he didn't leave me exactly, right? It wasn't personal. It wasn't that I wasn't important. It was that something big called him, and that is his business, not mine. And when I see him in context, I am not, when I leave him with his business, I am not leaving him alone. In a way, I am leaving with people who can care for him. And then I can give up the second task because it's a double bind. One, I reject you. I reject my father. I dismiss my father. So he can't leave me again. And the other is I will do anything for him to stay. Those are working simultaneously. It is like a huge double bind, right? A huge double bind.
So to anyone who's listening, I will, at least from my perspective, it's good to listen and see where your body jumps when you listen to it. And that's like, that's like clues to your story. Yeah. Okay. I thought about the third one, at least the one I'm thinking about, the fear of abandoning. Yeah.
Which is the fear of taking action, right? In a very general way, it's the fear of taking action. The fear of and it begins with the fear of abandoning the important to others, right? Beginning with mother and father, but then there are sometimes important, the second mother or the adoptive family or the kibbutz, right? So it begins there and then it spreads immediately, for many people. And my fear early on is that I will not survive because all of these are survival. These all have to do with survival. That's how fundamental they are. And then that they will not survive if I do it. And those things get so entangled with one another that I can't answer like I'm being tested in school. Oh, that time it was because I was afraid I wouldn't survive. But that time I was afraid they wouldn't survive it. It's absolutely one very tightly bound sensation, right? So the fear of abandoning first the important others. And then that translates very quickly into a life of fear of taking action, particularly around leaving. So you meet a lot of people in constellation circles, in therapy, in the restaurant, in the conversation you get into with the wait person, right? You meet an awful lot of people, and I meet it in myself, where I say, "Hey, you have worked for this man," we'll stick with dad for a moment, "for years and years and years, and you know very well that there's nowhere to move up to in this particular company, or you know very well that he underpays you. You complain about it all of the time, but you cannot take action. You do not take action. We do not take action, and we feel stupid, and then sometimes we stop telling people because we don't want them to keep telling us to take action, right? Because we can't. Usually, when you have a conversation with somebody and you ask, so listeners, going to the body piece here, when you ask somebody, why is it that you can't leave? Well, the first thing is you're going to get all the superficial reasons, um, some of which are funny, like the company needs me. The company doesn't need anybody. Sorry. Or I have to, pay my rent and right, you get all the superficial reasons. Then you press into it and you say, "Okay, I get that. And what else?" And then finally we get to the reasons that are purely somatic. And they do not belong here. They belong somewhere else. So if you ask me, why could I not leave? And I won't use any names, but I'll say way back, this man, this male, this boss, why could I not leave? And there wasn't just one. There's one, let's see, I think there are about 7. Why could you not leave? If you press, I'd give you all the reasons. And then if you press me and you'd say, well, after that, why? I would say, because it feels like I might die or not be able to bear the grief of leaving, or he might not be able to survive. Clearly, I'm not talking about the man who ran the photography studio.
I hope he listens.
Clearly, I'm not talking about him. It just has his face right now. But actually, I'm going back to a place where movement, particularly leaving, even for my own best interests, felt impossible. Felt impossible. Right?
Yeah.
So in your little basket from past to future, right? First of all, it's just this level of understanding. It is magical. It is magical. This level of understanding is magical. Then self-compassion. Not compassion for others, self-compassion. Right? Really important. Really important, because then you kind of unhook in a certain way from your bad behavior, from your little girl, right? You unhook from that and you begin to take over in a sense, right? For me, that little girl, that integration of the young spirit. And by the way, sometimes at various times she's 3 and then she's 7 and then she's 12 and then she's 16 and then she's 24 and she's doing all of these things. but she's still doing the same thing. So there's a way in which I want to actually unhook from her. And I want to have the sentence, you know what? Here's how I'm going to relieve your burden. I'm going to take over. I see that this man is not my father. It's the first thing. It's the first thing, right? And then I have compassion for myself for having worked for so little money for 5 years. And I think to myself, that was a good thing. I was walking a bridge and I wasn't ready to get to the other side. It was a good thing, especially if I keep going. Right? And then I do this thing that Bert talked about. And I think it's one of the most important things we can do, which is leave with love. Because in a way, that is leaving with the imagining that I can integrate this experience. If I have to kill this guy who runs the photography studio in order to leave, then I will not have actually left.
That takes me to a thought I have that there is an actual living and there's this inner living. Because I'm thinking about myself as an immigrant. I left, but did I really leave?
Beautiful. Yes.
And it's so all these elements that we're talking about, if people feel stuck, it's almost like facing what is and ripping the outside to look what's behind it.
Yep.
As a previous experience.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And what do you know? Like I make the joke, I'm sort of making fun of psychology, I suppose, although I love psychology, but I'm making fun of the insurance aspect of psychology, which is all of this stuff is evidence-based. Meaning we have evidence for fear of death, fear of abandonment, fear of abandoning. We have evidence for it. That's why it still informs me. It's not in my head, it's in my body.
So we can talk about these elements not just as fears that appear in everybody's life story, but as elements in everyone's body or, yeah, okay.
So that goes to the last one. It's either the last or the second to last, depending whether you're talking to Iris or to me. But for the moment, the last one is the fear of punishment, right? And fear of punishment is related to all of them. Fear of punishment has the most obvious systemic quality to it, meaning that there are many ways we are punished, right? We are punished, sometimes being slapped in the face by important others, but the deeper punishments, I think that's a fairly, that overt punishment is something I can deal with a little bit more easily in a way than the punishment of withdrawal, for instance, or the punishment of ignoring, or the punishment or diminishing your experience, right? So, this phrase, this is the last time I'm ever going to use this word, gaslighting. Gaslighting is such a severe experience because it takes away your ability to stand in your place. And there's sort of nothing worse than that, because then that's something we carry for a lifetime. So fear of punishment has that very powerful quality. And then it has a really strong systemic, strong systemic aspect. When we go back in our histories, we don't have to go back very far. You actually go back less far than I do in terms of what happened to people So I use this word predecessor instead of ancestor sometimes. Partly because I like it because it's lower, it's not so grand, right? Um, some of my ancestors, I'm sure, were real assholes, right? So I like to keep it, I am of, right? But the other reason I use predecessors sometimes instead of ancestors is because they're close,
Mhm.
right? They're close. They're not all 100 years, 500 years ago. They are close, right? So we don't have to go too far back in your lineage for people to have been punished, are being punished right now, for things like visibility, for things like having a voice and using a voice, for things like being one religion or another religion, for having a way in the world that is different from the overarching way in the world, right? So fear of punishment has really something that goes through the generations and resides in our bodies, right? So whether you are a gay person or a Jewish person or a Catholic person or an atheist person or whatever it is, or a Black person, whatever it is you are, there is a felt, known experience of punishment for being who you are.
Mm.
So one way that a person can pass is to be quiet,
Mhm.
for instance.
I What jumps to me right now is, and we'll find a connection. But when I was a teenager, I sang in a group, uh, and we had a performance. And every time that we were on stage, I only moved my lips, but I've never let my voice out. I was
Wow.
like really fearful. And the one who was orchestrating this, she recognized it and she came while the performance happens and was doing this movement to me. Okay, let your voice out without talking. And I was like, now everybody sees it. And I remember this fear. And I'm thinking, okay, so it must, maybe it's rooted not even in my lifetime.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
Mhm. Right. So that's really that strange systemic idea, right? That Bert, again, the definition is very simple, but it's very hard to understand, right? We have a personal conscience. We know our personal conscience in a way. People say, I'm going to follow my conscience or whatever it is they say, right? Whatever it is we say. We know our personal conscience in a way. The systemic conscience is the conscience that we follow, but we do not know what it is we're following. So that idea that you literally pass, like you're in a chorus, you are moving your lips to belong, but you're not allowing voice to come out. Okay, so maybe it's one thing nested in another, but it certainly seems to me that that has something to do with something that is not yours. That is not yours.
And I love the idea that everybody that listen has this experience because it's an element that we all know.
Fundamental.
So let's get to the fifth one, which is not established, but maybe you say a few words about it.
So, well, you said it, and it's something that I teach about.
Mhm.
And I just hadn't put it in this sort of category. And I said to you that maybe I will from now on, but right now I'll talk about it anyway, which is the fear. So I'm going to put it the way that I would put it, which is the fear that we cannot rise to the occasion, that we do not have the capacity. So I talk a lot about, what we learn in the womb, about our mother's relationship to the world, her relationship to herself, her relationship to the others in the home, the father, and her relationship to us. Where did we first hear we are too much? Probably in the womb. Where did we first hear we are the miracle baby? Like, that's the worst message. Like, holy shit, I'm a miracle baby. Oh my gosh. I would just like to be a baby baby. Right? Where did we first learn these things? So then, and then also nested in the history. So both things where systemic and personal conscience meet, they meet at the corner. And then they get all mixed up with one another. And one of the lessons that we often learn is that when it comes time to do whatever it is, particularly if we want to do it, that we will not have the capacity to rise to the occasion. We will not have the capacity to succeed. And we will not have the capacity to fail. And so we like deflate. Right? So it's a kind of interrupted movement. You see it with people who keep getting to the threshold and then they don't go out the door. And why do they do that? Each time they don't, each time they teach themselves the same lesson, right? See, I didn't do it. See, I couldn't do it, right? But it doesn't start with that door. It starts with this sense that we actually don't have what it takes to rise to the occasion, right? So people who, for instance, go back and forth about things for a year and then 10 years and then 20 years and then a lifetime, never actually kind of stopping, like staying in this motion and not going to this motion, are people who learn somewhere that they do not have the capacity for the next. Because to have the capacity for the next, you have to be willing. You have to believe you can withstand failure. That's easy for some people. Success, that's a little harder because success is an expansion. And if I have the sense and evidence that I don't have the capacity to do that, then my aspiration and my sense of self never get aligned. I want, but I don't have the understanding that I can. It's a kind of tolerance.
Can it by any chance come from a brother who didn't make it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. An older brother who didn't make it.
Older.
Right? So just like a real quick thing, because I know we're coming to the end and we're not really talking about this. But when I talked about the idea of being in the womb and learning our mother's experience in the world, if there are children before us, we also are learning about their experience and we're in fact carrying their cells. And so if one of those siblings didn't make it, which is the case, and he made it, but then he was taken away. So if that's the experience that we have, we carry that sense of like, going back to what you said in the beginning, everything is possible. Oh, everything will be taken away, right? Everything is, it's like this motion. And then, oh, I don't have the ability or the capacity to rise to the occasion. On a fundamental level, that is the occasion of life.
Yeah. Thank you, Susie. Yeah, we are coming to the end. And it's really interesting. So just to give it some closure, I would actually love if whoever listened to us would attend to his body, and maybe you can say these 4 or 5 elements slowly, and people can see what jumping as clues to the future.
Yeah, so I will invite people to sit back. And actually, it's funny, I don't do meditations really ever. And when I do, I call them reflections. But that's partly because I want people to be light. There's like really nothing to do. It's just to follow in a slightly different way, not to follow the meaning of words, really, just to kind of follow what your body already knows and to allow it to emerge as a piece of knowledge you already have, and then attend to it later, right? So as I say, these 5, as I say, these 5 fundamental aspects of a common life, meaning common to us all, and also meaning every day, right? Feel where that is in your body. Is it in your heart? Is it in your lungs? Is it in your belly? Is it in your feet? Does it remain in your head? For me, the head is a part of the body and I never complain about it. So the first, because I think it is the most accessible, is fear of death. And I'll just add to that, it really is the fear of our very last chance. Right? And the next, because it is also common, so common that people joke about it, but it actually has very deep meaning and it sets a metronome for a life where we will do anything to avoid it. And that's fear of abandonment. And as I did when we spoke, I'm going to change that a little bit to the assumption of abandonment. The assumption of abandonment. It's a hard first lesson, right? And the third thing, which is really about our own volition and agency, and it's really not clear whether we are more afraid that we won't survive or that they won't survive because it's all tangled up. And that's the fear of abandoning. And the translation in an everyday way is fear of taking action. Every time I take action, I leave something or someone. Every time. So fear of abandoning, fear of my own agency. And then the next has a really intergenerational quality. It flows through like a stream, something we know maybe in our body way before we know it in our mind. And that's fear of punishment. And that comes with really the fundamental ideas of things like visibility, voice, and that level, that hue, that color affects everything. So I'm afraid of visibility because I will be punished as my ancestors were. When they came out of the forest, they were killed. When they had the nerve to complain, the slave master beat them, right? It's in the body. It's really in the body. And if I'm afraid of visibility, it impacts everything. What will I do to avoid it? How can I align with my aspiration and that somatic sense? Where does that live? That lives in my chest, by the way. And then the last one is the fear that we will not have the capacity to ... to rise to the occasion, to follow through, to pass the threshold, to do what we spend a lifetime wanting to do.
Thank you so much, Suzi. And to people who felt it but cannot still understand exactly, that's great. It will come up, and yeah. Thank you so much, Suzi. It was a pleasure to hear you and your wisdom. And see you next time. Till soon, as you say.
Till soon.
Till soon as your signature. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.